Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., reminding you to keep up with all world events, domestic, economic, military, political, at tarpley.net, tarpley.net. You can also use your visit to tarpley.net to buy one of my books, one or more. They're all available there. You can find them in the right-hand column on the main page of tarpley.net. And while you're there, take a look at the red box at the top, the 5-point program to get out of the world economic depression. Now, we're on a kind of special watch here having to do with Syria. We've been getting reports from a group of observers in Syria. These are anti-NATO Syrians. These are anti-death squad activists in Damascus and other places. And if you've been looking at my Twitter feed, Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter, you will find that there are basically two waves of warnings. One was that the Death Squad faction, the pro-NATO group, that is to say the foreign-trained, foreign-armed death squads and their in-country fanatical supporters, right, whatever they are, Muslim Brotherhood, psychotics, fanatics, whatever they are, that they had been planning to pull a kind of publicity stunt, a provocation where they would come upon a mass of bodies of some kind of a mass grave, and they would then raise the hue and cry, "Oh my God, we discovered a mass grave of enemies of the Assad regime. These are all fresh corpses. Look, this is from the last few weeks, the last few days," and at least enough bodies to put on television and say, "Look, this is a hecatomb of wonderful democracy fighters." Now, this was all going to be staged, and one part of it was an attack on a hospital in Homs that's reported by these anti-death squad forces inside the country, saying that the death squads, the rebels, the Free Syrian Army, attacked the morgue of a hospital. They wanted to break into the morgue of a hospital to get a sufficient quantity of dead bodies to put them and use them as props in this provocation. Now, if you think about it, I think the obvious historical parallel is what was going on with the Gleiwitz radio station in late August, early September 1939, when Hitler and company decided that they wanted to have a staged provocation. They got prisoners, executed them, dressed them up in Polish army uniforms, shot them, put them around the Gleiwitz radio station, and then argued, "Oh, look, these Polish forces came over and tried to attack our radio station here in Germany, and we were able to fight them off, and look at all these dead bodies." This is similar. So you're seeing all kinds of parallels to Nazi activities and what's going on today. So this was the first one. This question of the dead bodies and that provocation. Now, the other one was just in the last 24 hours, and this refers to today being Friday, the 13th of April, 2012. The other one was we got a report from anti-death squad forces in Syria that a station broadcasting a fanatical jihadi, a Wahhabite from Saudi Arabia, was hyping the idea that there was going to be a bomb, actually two bombs, in Damascus on Friday the 13th, that is to say today. And it looks like we've gotten through this, but you never know. So the idea being the Saudi preacher, this is a well-known fanatic, his name I think is Ahura, and he is his story is that he was saying, look, there are going to be two bombs on Friday in Damascus, and the government is going to be the responsible party. Now, of course, if he puts this out in advance, the likelihood is that he, or not he, his side, let us say, his anti-Syrian government forces would be the ones actually responsible. So this was something that was rumored in Damascus, and if you take a look at my Twitter feed here last night, let's see what we have. Syrian anti-NATO sources report pro-terrorist television channel Safa, S-A-F-A. That's I guess it's a satellite channel from Saudi Arabia. And the guy's name is Sheikh Arour, A-R-O-O-R sometimes, or A-R-U-R also sometimes. So Syrian anti-NATO sources report pro-terrorist TV channel Safa, S-A-F-A, the speaker being Sheikh Arour, A-R-O-O-R. They're hyping two bombs. They were hyping yesterday and the day before. Two bombs that were going to go off in Damascus on Friday, and they were saying, oh, watch out, if this happens, it's Assad doing it. In reality, as I explain here, the Free Syrian Army are the far more likely perps, as in perpetrators. So this is the kind of thing that we're looking at now. We're now operating under the Kofi Annan plan. Now, this is, to put it mildly, a monstrosity. This is Orwellian. It is fundamentally not balanced, right? The Russian position was this is balanced. It's not balanced. It's not balanced in the sense that it puts a member state of the United Nations, a constituted existing government, which has been there for a while, on the same level as a gaggle of political operatives and killers, then terrorists, fanatics, psychotics, the patsy milieu, as we've described it. They've been brought in to wage an armed insurrection with very little popular support in most areas, right? It's limited to 3 or 4 towns, all of them with a strong Muslim Brotherhood presence and or close to a border. So the idea now is Kofi Annan is demanding that the Syrian army should get out of the cities, essentially creating a vacuum, which would then be filled by terrorists, which would be filled then by the Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda, death squads, and all the rest. And therefore, you look at Kofi Annan. Who are you, Kofi? What is your moral authority? This is an imperialist operative. This is the kind of people that the British have created in their empire. He's from Ghana. The British have created these people as colonial administrators, imperialist bureaucrats, and then he took it all the way to become the head of the United Nations. And what do we have to show for his tenure as Secretary General of the United Nations? The bombing of Serbia in 1999, and then the Iraq War, and among other huge crimes. Also, oil for food for Iraq, and his son up to his neck in corruption. So this corrupt character, right? And probably one of the ways they can control him is say, if you don't do what we say this time, and if you get any ideas, think of your legacy, then your son might be in trouble again. God knows, right, what these people do. So Kofi is an imperialist operative. Don't be fooled by Kofi's mild-mannered appearance. The idea that the army should leave the cities is a monstrosity. This past week, Press TV and some other Middle East sources were pointing to the fact that the Syrian people were asking for the army not to leave. They want the Syrian army to be there to protect them from the terrorist death squads, from the fanatics, from Al-Qaeda, from the lunatics, right, from the rule of violence and caprice. And that is what I found also in Homs and in Banyas last November. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., reminding you to keep up with everything at Tarpley.net. Go to Tarpley.net, click on Twitter in the upper right-hand corner. That will take you to the Twitter feed. The Twitter feed is important these days because we have to be able to respond from 1 minute and 1 hour to the next about these things. Last night, I put out this warning about this crazy preacher talking up, hyping mercilessly that there were going to be bombs in Damascus. So we got up to 11 11 retweets here in about, 14, 15 hours. That's the kind of thing that you need to be able to do. It's time to get it up to above 50. Check Webster G. Tarpley, and if you find something there, if you agree with it, retweet it or rephrase it or respond to it in some way so we can generate a buzz on Twitter. Twitter is the blood and sand of the arena of world public opinion, and that's where you've got to be. Got to get in there and fight. So what I found in Homs, in the Zara neighborhood, and in Banyas with a very broad multi-ethnic sample, Sunnis, Alawites, Maronites, all kinds of people. I think probably some Kurds and Druzes, at least along the way. They want the Syrian army there. They don't want to be delivered to the tender mercies of the terrorist NATO death squads of fanatics and psychotics. They don't want Belhaj to become the mayor of their town and carry out a reign of terror, right? A massive bloodletting. What do you think the death squads do when they take over a neighborhood in Homs? They go in there and kill everybody they think is pro-Assad. That is what the United Nations now comes down to. And needless to say, Ban Ki-moon should be ousted. It's time to get rid of Ban Ki-moon. It's time to get rid of this woman, Navi Pillai, another bureaucrat at the United Nations, and there are a bunch of others, because they all go along with this. These are not international civil servants. They are like Kofi Annan, colonial administrators, imperialist operatives, and accomplices. And Moreno Ocampo is part of the same thing, because that court is essentially integrated into this same system. Now, the United Nations Security Council today discussing an observer mission. I simply have to say, China and Russia should be on notice that if they don't support Syria, it's just a fact. Their name will be mud. It's just that simple. So they have to know that. I think they do know it. I'm not particularly alarmed. It's fine to do all these things as a going through the motions and avoiding moments that the imperialists could use then as a pretext for something more insane. But at the same time, we need to hear from the Russian and Chinese foreign ministries more about the death squads. They are called death squads. We need to hear about death squads, and we need to hear about their violation. And why is it that the army of Syria has to leave the cities, but the death squads get to stay? There's no systematic recognition of the fact that what's going on in Syria is not the army against unarmed civilians, but it's the army contending with death squads surrounded by a following of fellow travelers, again, dupes, psychotics, mercenaries, double agents, whatever they are. So there it is. Now, special mention this week, McCain and Lieberman, right? The two amigos. I'm sure Lindsey Graham is not far behind. The two warmonger amigos. These characters are one-trick ponies. They have learned absolutely nothing. And when you look at Obama, I suppose one of the consolations is it's not McCain, because with McCain we probably would have had more in the way of wars than we've had. That's pure speculation. But certainly this McCain is an abominable excuse for a U.S. senator, and the same thing goes for his friend Lieberman of Connecticut and Lindsey Graham. So the three amigos are out there popping off. They go to Turkey. They go around and shooting their mouths off. One-trick ponies. War is the answer. Then we have the dynamic duo of Hillary Clinton and Susan Rice. Now, this is basically a contest. Who can hiss? Who can do the best imitation of an angry snake? Miss Rice, of course, is attempting to outdo Hillary because she hopes to become the successor of Hillary. She wants to be the Secretary of State. I think one Rice was enough. Boy, I wonder if the Rice family has got anybody else at home after Condoleezza and Susan. Now, they're not related, I know. Don't send me emails that they're not related. I know. But there it is, right? What brand of rice do you want? No, thank you. Not good for you. The answer to these people is, if you want to pacify Syria, call off your death squads, your NATO-created, NATO-armed, NATO-directed death squads with French, British, U.S., CIA, Joint Special Operations Command officers, Qatari officers, Qatari special forces. French have been captured there. French officers have been captured. French mercenaries have been captured. The Syrian government, for its own reasons, does not make this into a big thing. They could have had a show trial. They didn't do it. So this is the current situation. People are looking at Turkey. We had the Friends of Syria conference. Now remember, that Friends of Syria conference was an imitation of Munich 1938. Right? This was the country that was interested, that was attacked, was not invited. Czechoslovakia was not invited to Munich. The Russians were excluded in both cases. And in the case of Munich, it was Hitler, Mussolini, Chamberlain, Daladier talking about how they were going to carve up Czechoslovakia. What did they want? Oh, they just wanted a safe zone. They wanted a buffer zone. It was called the Sudetenland. It was the rim of the western part of the Czech Republic, of Czechoslovakia at that time. And in this case, they're talking about the same thing. Now, so far, Erdogan has restrained himself. He may be getting messages from Moscow, don't take the plunge. There's a huge Russian nuclear development project going on in Turkey, right? A very big deal, worth $10 or $20 billion. So maybe that's enough to hold Erdogan back from the brink. So today, the DPRK, North Korea, launches a rocket, and we're told it fails. Let's see if that's the case. In any eventuality, North Korea is helping the United States once again. Remember, the purpose of North Korea, from the State Department point of view, is to scare Japan and scare South Korea so that they will have to cling to the United States and be obedient vassals of the United States. In particular, the goal is to prevent Japan from gravitating towards China, and that's the whole point of this entire thing. Should have mentioned that in the background of these events, there's an interesting thing going on. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, that European finance, Spain and Italy under pressure once again. We've also had that period of about 4 or 5 days here in the New York stock market. It went down about, 500, 600 points. This crisis is back, and we know what was able to cool it off now for the last couple of months. Draghi of Goldman Sachs, the new head of the European Central Bank, when he was installed at the European Central Bank, replacing Trichet, essentially launched 2 tranches of 500 billion euros each, $500 billion euros each time, for a total of 1 trillion euros. One was in December, one was in February to March. That trillion of euros is what has stabilized Europe, because it goes to the banks, of course, at 1%. These are 1% loans. They're not exactly the Federal Reserve 0%, but they're 1% loans. He refuses to lend that to governments that might build infrastructure with it, but he's happy to lend it to zombie bankers so that they can roll over their mass of kited, cancerous, bankrupt derivatives. Now, that money, with 1 trillion euros, you could start a massive economic recovery in Europe. You would say the European Central Bank puts out a tender offer, offers to buy bonds from the national governments. The bonds are strictly limited to financing projects of infrastructure. We know all about it, right? The highway systems have got to be rebuilt. The rail systems have got to be modernized. We need fast rail everywhere. We need maglev rail. We need those connections to Africa across the Straits of Gibraltar and from Sicily to Tunisia and so forth. We need public housing. Public housing is one of the huge topics in Europe that gets very little attention. So with 1 trillion euros of the type that Draghi put out, we could easily have launched that kind of a recovery. But no, people are screaming about every other thing, right? We've got professors in Germany telling us that the euro is illegal. but offering no way out of the depression, because whatever they declare illegal, they're still going to be in a depression, whether it's illegal or not. So there's an element of political realism and expedience that is simply missing from the legalistic critique of the euro. So therefore, we have no recovery, and now, as a result of Draghi's misallocation of this credit, €1 trillion lent out, and now, sure enough, a couple of months later, Spain and Italy are back under pressure, right? The interest rates they're paying creep up above 6% towards 7% and so forth. And then we've got the saddest of all commentaries, the suicides. In the past 2 weeks, we've had a wave of suicides across Europe. I'm going to talk about 2 countries. There are undoubtedly others, and there are undoubtedly other suicides that don't get reported this way. Remember Bouazizi of Tunisia, the fruit vendor? Well, we've gone through that story. You'll remember that Bouazizi was called in because he was cheating his customers with a fake scale, and he was called in by a woman inspector from the Department of Weights and Measures and Trade, and she wanted to check his scale because the accusation was that Bouazizi was ripping people off. He then became a hero when he tried to fake a self-immolation. He got some gasoline. His cousin was there with a fire extinguisher, and Bouazizi thought he could set himself on fire to a very limited extent and then have the fire extinguisher brought into play to extinguish the flames and use that as a sympathy gag. And unfortunately for this poor guy, the fire extinguisher didn't work. Water was tried, made the flames worse, and he later died. So Bouazizi is a fake story. But the point of Bouazizi here is, look what the world media did with Bouazizi back in December and January of 2010 to 2011. Now, let's look at the new Bouazizis, if you will, but they're unsung. They're totally anonymous. We don't know their names. We just know that they're dying. People are killing themselves. There's one case in Greece of a suicide, and then in Italy, we actually have 4 suicides that I know of. 4 people have killed themselves as a result of Monti's killer austerity program. Monti of Goldman Sachs, once again, is attempting to institute fire at will. You can fire anybody anytime you want. He calls that a reform. And Monti is also gouging the Italian pensions. There's a demonstration in Rome going on today, protesting Monti of Goldman Sachs, gangsters, bandits, and they pontificate. This character struts. Oh, he embodies adult responsibility and integrity and rigor and austerity. This is simply the rule of bandits. This is Madoff in power. This is simply the dictatorship of finance capital with all of its horrendous excesses. So in Italy, it's 4 attempted suicides and 4 suicides that have been completed, 4 people who died, and 2 attempted suicides. And there was, interestingly enough, an outburst in the Italian parliament by Di Pietro. Di Pietro, of course, the judge, the investigating magistrate who brought down the political system with his clean hands investigation 20 years ago. He now leads a small political party. But Di Pietro at least had the merit of telling Monti of Goldman Sachs, these deaths are on your conscience. Your killer austerity plan is what has essentially driven these people to despair. I found an interesting tape on the internet. Karl Ludwig Holtfrerich. I'll put this on the Twitter feed in the day or two here. This is an interview that he gave a couple of months ago. He points out another bunch of things that we've talked about here on the program. In the Panic of 1837 here in the United States, the Panic of 1837, of course, brought about by Andrew Jackson and Van Buren and Tawney, this gang of thugs, the destruction of the Second Bank of the United States was an unmitigated disaster for this country because it removed the protective shield that protected the United States from the British financial market and from other excesses, domestic excesses. Andrew Jackson, one of the worst presidents, one of the biggest bandits, he comes from the Aaron Burr school of treason and treachery. So with his destruction of the Second Bank of the United States, the country is on the way to the Panic of 1837, which occurs under Van Buren, the agent of the New York banks and therefore of London. In this crisis, 9 states actually go bankrupt, according to Holtfrecht's count. So 9 states out of 27 states go bankrupt. 1/3 of the states go bankrupt. Now, what did it mean? Was there a dollar crisis? No. Was there an immediate question of these states having to leave the Union because they were bankrupt? No. This never arose. This is absurd. If you're an American, you're no less American if you happen to be bankrupt. If you're a European, you're still part of Europe if you're bankrupt, right? These countries like the Iberian Peninsula or the Italian Peninsula don't just separate and float away if they declare bankruptcy or a moratorium. This is ridiculous. So Holtfrecht also points out that whenever you have a free market, if that's all you have, it will become a monopoly in short order. Let's just talk about that for the benefit of the Ron Paul devotees in the audience. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Anytime you have a free market, you will get a monopoly. And in these taped remarks, Holtfrecht, economic historian, points to the history of the United States in the 19th century. Right? When you start off 1870, the Gilded Age begins. It's largely deregulated in the sense that you don't have antitrust laws. There's no anti-cartel, anti-monopoly, antitrust legislation to speak of. And by 1890, within 20 to 25 years at the very most, you have a fully developed system of monopolies. And these were known as the trusts. And the trusts were nothing but cartels, monopolies, oligopolies, duopolies. And Holtfrecht cites the example of United States Steel as an example of how you go from well, it's not a free market, but it's a multi-centered market with actual competition among quite a number of competing producers. You get then U.S. Steel, which becomes a monopoly. The same thing goes for Standard Oil. Standard Oil gets up to about 80 to 90% of all oil in the United States is being bought and sold by Standard Oil. So much so that even back in 1912, it's decided, I guess by the Supreme Court, that the Standard Oil has to be broken up. So you can look at these cases, U.S. Steel, Standard Oil, and so forth. It shows you that if you have a deregulated market, you will soon have monopoly. You will soon have a cartel. You will soon have a trust. You will get the restraint of trade. So the only way to maintain any kind of competition and a plurality of actors in the market is through government regulation. Yes, government regulation. Call it big government if you want to, because it's got to be big enough to take on Standard Oil and U.S. Steel and American Telephone and Telegraph in a later phase and all the rest of them pretty much at the same time. Yes, big government. So the idea of talking about a utopian free market where you get to a free market and you stay there, everything's hunky-dory, this is simply a delusion. You have to be very ignorant. You have to be radically anti-historical to take any of that seriously. This is, of course, the basis of the Ron Paul campaign. Precisely people who look around and say they don't like what they see. That's fine. Then they say the answer to that is a free market. A free market is a very unstable phase. Again, a free market, you haven't had a free market since hunting and gathering. As soon as you have a state, free market is no longer there. But what they mean by it is a largely deregulated market. A largely deregulated market puts you on the way to complete monopoly. And similarly, what they say, if you destroy the Federal Reserve, if you remove the Federal Reserve from the picture and simply leave it up to the banks as they are today in a deregulated banking market, you would very soon have, well, what you have, but more extreme, either a monopoly or a duopoly or an oligopoly or a cartel. The cartel is what you have now, a banking cartel that would essentially parasitize the economic life of the American people. That's what you have. Now, the other side of this is, remember, people in Europe, the goal has to be to build awareness, not that the euro is bad, but that the European Central Bank is bad, that Draghi in particular is bad, Monti is bad, Papademos in Greece is bad, the finance minister of Spain, coming from Lehman Brothers. This is amazing. That expertise, yes, the wonderful expertise that drove Lehman into the ditch is what we need in Spain. And remember, you've got to get control of the credit-creating capacity so that you can create European credit for European infrastructure and your 40 million productive jobs. All of these words, full employment, production, rising standards of living, you don't even hear from these libertarian economists. It's all, for them, it's all about tinkering with money. The infallible sign of a petty bourgeois crank approach, usually in the service of bigger interests, is the exclusive fascination with money, the alienation, the fetishism, the reification of money, as if this were the actual embodiment of productive power. You've got to look at production. We'll talk about infrastructure later on. But now let's see, where do we stand in terms of the U.S. Political evolution? As of this week, the asset stripper and warmonger Romney seems to have gained the upper hand more or less definitively in the Republican Party. We're still hoping for something from some of his opponents to keep it going. Romney, an asset stripper, right? Bain Capital. He's going to call the Oval Office La Salle de Bain in the White House. He's also the guy who came out saying Russia is the main strategic enemy of the United States. Oh my God! You'll notice that Russia today seems to have an enduring fascination with Ron Paul. I wonder if they realize that Ron Paul is actually a wingman or auxiliary of the Romney campaign, and that the only question for Ron Paul right now is will his convention votes be needed? The goal of the Ron Paul campaign was to amass a group of delegates, not because they wanted to only exalt their ideology, but for the benefit of little Rand, for the benefit of the mediocre son who needed to have his nest feathered for the future, right, as Secretary of the Treasury or Vice President or some other thing. It's thought that little Rand will run for president, again, on the basis of absolutely nothing in his case. Remember, little Rand voted for the Iran economic sanctions. Little Rand made his pilgrimage to the offices of William Crystal at the Weekly Standard and said, yes, he would be open to a war with Iran. That would be okay if it really came to that. So there is no honor in this. There is no principle in this. The big question for Ron Paul is, will that be needed? In other words, will he get a chance to sell out his followers by telling them to vote for Mitt Romney? And as of right now, that's sort of up in the air, but it doesn't look that good for the deal. Right? The deal was, in case of need, if there's no need, then the price will not be paid in the way that was thought. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, Romney, asset stripper, warmonger, seems to be on his way to grabbing the GOP nod. Santorum, the clerical fascist, Senator Sanitarium, dropping out this past week. And that, of course, means will Mitt Romney then need his deal with Ron Paul to deliver the Ron Paul delegates to put Romney over the top and therefore extract in payment for that some plum for little Rand. This is now up in the air. Insider talk at that debate that I had last week, David Frum, the leading neocon, critical neocon, if you will, dissident neocon up to a point, was overheard talking to a group of young conservatives, let's say young neocons, some of them with perhaps intelligence community aspirations. He was overheard. He was asked who should the vice presidential candidate for Mitt Romney be, and according to people who heard the conversation, Frum replied, Petraeus would be the best candidate. So General Petraeus, ex-head of the Central Command, ex-leader of the invasion of Afghanistan, or the invasion forces, would be the best. So Frum seems to be, like most neocons, it's not a surprise whether they're dissident or not. Mainline neocons, dissident neocons, Petraeus for vice president. Mark Shields, the guy who plays the liberal, right? Shields and Brooks. But this time it was not on Shields and Brooks. It was on Inside Washington with Gordon Peterson, the Agronsky and Company descendant. He was going through a catalog of people that might be named vice president by Romney. General Petraeus, he said. General Petraeus would be somebody you'd name if you wanted to make a statement about who you were and your global policy goals. Now, the last time you had a president who was then backed up by a vice president with strong CIA connections, a former CIA chief, was, of course, Reagan Bush. And we've just had the anniversary of the Hinckley incident, if that's the right name for it. The Hinckley incident of the spring of 1981 shows you how unstable those combinations can be. So the other thing that it will become an issue, I think, is the question of, it's not so much Romney and Mormonism, but it's Romney and the specific clique around him, who often happen to be Mormons. And by this we're talking about Huntsman. John Huntsman was this liberal Republican candidate. We saw him. His father, of course, the head of this huge enterprise. This is connected to the Ron Paul fundraising operation, but specifically the fact that Romney is connected to the Marriotts, to the Huntsman family, and to it's a group of extremely wealthy Mormons who are kind of a directorate, right? His kitchen cabinet, his friends of myth, whatever we want to call it, and then the role of Mormonism in that. And perhaps we'll go back and look at a scandal of the 1980s, the mid-1980s, the White Salamander letters. And one unforgettable day that I spent in Salt Lake City, Utah, I was at these radio stations, supposed to be interviewed on different topics, and a bomb had gone off in a car in the center of Salt Lake City, and this was connected to the mysterious White Salamander letters. And the story here is, it's a letter which allegedly was found by somebody saying that when Joseph Smith discovered the plates on which the Book of Mormon was written, there was a white salamander sitting on top, a newt, if you will, a white newt. And this was, of course, thought to be disturbing because of what the significance of a white salamander might be. So the Mormon Church, of course, not happy with this story, wanted to diminish the influence of the story, and then this wild series of events going on there. We'll have to look into that because it's also a powerful political faction in the intelligence community and elsewhere. So you got to know what you're getting, and this is not indifferent. And the Freemasonic overtone is rather strong, and then that's where I think we get the interface with the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasons and the Ron Paul campaign.